This is a Triple J podcast.
Hack.
Hey, it's Dave Marchese. This is the Hack Podcast. There's one story out of the Olympics that's dominated headlines over the weekend. You would have seen all of the misinformation that was flying around. There was abuse targeting specific athletes, even apologies from Olympians, media outlets, officials. Why all this uproar around Algerian boxer Imani Khalif? Later, we're going to be looking into this story and why some have labelled it an unhinged controversy that should never happen again. It's also focused attention on sex testing around sport, so we're going to look at that.
On Triple J.
Yeah, even if you're not following the Olympics, chances are you have heard about this story. One women's boxing match that's dominated headlines around the world. Algerian boxer Imani Khalif went up against Italian Angela Carini last week. Now, Carini pulled out of the match after less than a minute, saying she's never been hit so hard. And that sparked this massive uproar about Imani Khalif's eligibility to compete in the Games. Many, including media outlets, falsely reporting that she was a man or transgender.
Hack. Another story that we've been covering is the growing controversy over the Algerian boxer Imani Khalif.
This young girl from Italy, a champion boxer, she got hit so hard she didn't know what the hell hit her.
So the whole internet started accusing Imani Khalif being a man.
The Algerian boxer was born female.
If you don't like getting punched in the face, you probably shouldn't be boxing.
On Triple J.
Yeah, so Imani Khalif has actually given an interview since all of this, started spreading around the world, saying she is a woman, will continue to fight, and that this is a matter of dignity and honour for every woman or female. The International Olympic Committee has clarified that Khalif is a woman, and there was never any doubt about that. But it hasn't stopped this firestorm of commentary, of abuse, of misinformation from spreading around the world. So what do we know? How did this happen? And should there be a concern here about fairness? Well, Dr. Ryan Storr is a research fellow in sport innovation at Swinburne University, and he's been looking into this. He's with us now. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on Hack.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
What do we know about Imani Khalif?
One thing I will say, just in the light of the previous story as well, there's been a lot of misinformation and factually incorrect information being shared. So I think it's important to understand that the Algerian athlete is a woman. She's been competing in women's boxing competitions for several years. I think what happened was there was governance issues from the IBA, which is the kind of, was the kind of World Boxing Association. But unfortunately, it's housed in Russia and has links, I think, to the Kremlin. So basically, it got stripped of its right to run the boxing competition. And the whole kind of furor happened because of some statements by some of the people working out there and the president of it. And ultimately, they kind of leaked information and said that they failed gender tests as part of the World Boxing Championship, I think last year. But there was no information about what tests they were, no specific information. And ultimately, that decision wasn't done in good faith, and it didn't kind of adhere to good governance principles. And ultimately, we don't actually know what tests were given to them. The only thing that we kind of have heard is that they had high levels of testosterone. But within some sporting competitions, that's not enough to ban someone, especially when you are a biological woman.
So how did this escalate so dramatically, especially if the International Olympic Committee is there saying, no, this was never in doubt?
Unfortunately, online, and I think in particular some high-profile people shared information, especially J.K. Rowling, who I think has like up to 16 million followers on some social media platforms. And ultimately, originally, it was shared that the athlete was transgender. Now, it's interesting because trans athletes have been banned really from a lot of sports since the last Olympics. Many sports like world athletics, triathlon, those type of events have done blanket bans. So no trans woman can participate in any Olympic competition within those sports. So they weren't even competing, but then they've made it around trans athletes and suggested that the Algerian athlete was transgender when she was not. So basically misinformation happened online. It started spreading. People picked it up and really went with it. And I think because of the nature of boxing and it being a kind of physical contact sport, people associated trying to kind of push an agenda and try and vilify trans athletes.
Is it just Imani Khalif, or are there other athletes that have been facing scrutiny, specifically at the Olympics this year?
There's one other particular athlete from Chinese Taipei, I believe. I don't think she's copped as much of the abuse because she kind of hasn't been in the limelight as much. But ultimately, yes, there's two athletes who, according to the IBA, failed gender tests. So there's two particular athletes, and they are actually still in the competition. So I think this probably issue will still bubble for a few days. But ultimately, both women have done everything that they needed to do. They've adhered to the policies, they've done the guidelines, etc. So there shouldn't really be any issue. I think it's this kind of, it was that leaked information from the Russian president of the organization that really led to all this. And I think he probably did that because of the sour grapes, let's say, in the sense that it was stripped of its right to govern and to be able to manage and lead the Olympic boxing competition. So the IOC is actually running it this year.
All right, you're listening to Hack. I'm Dave Marchese. I'm speaking with Dr. Ryan Storr from Swinburne University about Olympic boxer Imani Khalif and the controversy around her at the Olympics that we've seen blow up over the weekend. Got some messages coming through. Liam from Junction Village says, she's a woman. If we're banning her, then Michael Phelps should have all his medals stripped as he had a genetic condition that gave him an advantage. Banning him would be mental, so banning her would be as well. Leave her alone, is Liam's opinion there. I wanted to ask you, Dr. Ryan Storr, how common is sex testing in sport?
Look, well, it was banned previously, so it was actually used by the IOC and adopted by many sports within the Olympics, and ultimately it was done to kind of test women's gender to ensure that they were women and they weren't men masquerading as women. So it was banned. It was heavily critiqued. There was a lot of advocacy done, so we've kind of dropped it. But unfortunately, these discussions, and especially in recent years with transgender athletes, people have been reintroducing the idea that we need to do that. But I think it's a really interesting point that you just read there. We don't police or scrutinize men's bodies. We don't ever think that there might be too much testosterone in some men, so we might need to decrease levels or give everyone a fair opportunity, that type of thing. So we really scrutinize women athletes in particular, and it's always women from the global south. So there's definitely a racialized element to it. We saw previously with Caster Semenya, who was an intersex athlete, and she ran in the 800 meter, 1500 meter. She was banned because she had high levels of testosterone. So it's always kind of, athletes from the global south, and it's always athletes who may be too fast or too good, and people always will then question their gender or sex because they think they can't excel and be good in their sport without having certain advantages.
We're hearing from so many people right now, Hack listeners. Someone says people seem to not understand that all human beings are born with varying levels of hormones and physical attributes, and intersex people exist. We cannot continue to box ideas about sex characteristics into the gender binary. Another person says if people were so worried about fairness in sport, we would be sorting all sports into hormone and physical characteristic categories and not gender. And another person says this amazing athlete only has just had a chance to defend herself publicly. It just goes to show the harmful impacts of lies easily spread online and the need to identify trusted sources and fact check our information. I mean, that's an important point, Dr. Ryan Storr, and I note that it's not just athletes, and that Italian boxer has actually come out and since apologised and said she has apologised to Khalif for her reaction and pulling out of that match, stating that she would embrace her the next time she saw her. We saw some huge media outlets, I think the Boston Globe in the US had to put a correction up saying we misreported when we said that Imani Khalif was not a woman. This obviously has huge ramifications in the way that sport is covered as well, Dr. Ryan Storr.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, that we are starting to kind of see corrections and those type of things. And we've even seen it in academic journal articles and things like that where certain things have been retracted because of inaccuracies. So I think it's really important that we do scrutinize this, but I think it also highlights that ultimately you can kind of say whatever you want online now. And I think sometimes it's not questioned or interrogated. So I think it's really important to kind of, highlight where we get these sources from and which experts we're listening to. Obviously, I kind of study this particular kind of area and topic and trans athlete policies as well. So it can be quite a specialized kind of niche topic. And I think, the academic communities has a lot of work to do also to try and communicate some of these complex messages so that people can understand them, because people are going to have these conversations. I've had lots of messages over the weekend and things asking for my opinion. So I think it's really important to kind of, have these conversations, but have them in respectful ways to ultimately think about what we can do to ensure that more women are able to compete. Because we've got to remember, women weren't able to compete in sport for many years. When they're one of the first women to do the marathon in Boston, and there's been some quite outdated ideas. One example I'll just give you, which is an interesting one, was that the International Ski Federation, one of the presidents, said that, and this was in 2010, that women might not be able to do ski jumping because their uterus might fall out or explode. And that was 2010. So I think there's still very complex and outdated understandings of what women can do. And ultimately, I think there's people who think that women shouldn't be boxing as well.
Well, we appreciate your take on all this. Dr. Ryan Storr from Swinburne University, thank you very much for coming on Hack.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
And some more messages. Someone says, it's weird that basically she's just great at her sport. If a woman ran a record speed, would this have happened? Or is it just because it was boxing? Someone else says it's illegal in her country to be trans too. And I hope she doesn't get into any trouble with all the misinformation going around. That was from Larissa in Hobart. And somebody else says, if you don't want to be punched in the face, then don't box. That's why I don't box, is someone's opinion there. All right, time to move on.